Please.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, my name is Stephen Tay. My co-counsels are Attorney Singh, Attorney Yingsol, Attorney Santana, and Attorney Rodriguez. We represent the defendant, Mr. Picks. Mr. Picks has been wrongfully and unfairly charged with making a terroristic threat and assaulting Mr. Hopkins in the second degree. Mr. Picks' actions were completely justified and were an act of self-defense. Mr. Picks' so-called terroristic threat was no way intended to coerce or intimidate Mr. Hopkins. Despite this, the prosecution would have you believe, without any justification, Mr. Picks assaulted and made a terroristic threat to Mr. Hopkins. However, this statement could not be farther from the truth. So what really happened at Kent High School on June 22nd, 2016? The evidence being presented here today will reveal a story of an abusive coach and a reasonable and concerned parent. The evidence will additionally prove that prior to Mr. Picks' confrontation with Mr. Hopkins, his son's football coach, Mr. Hopkins had verbally and physically abused the son of my client during football practice, going as far as to grabbing and slamming him to the ground. After this clear display of mistreatment, Mr. Picks wanted to have a civil conversation with his son's abuser. All my client wanted to do is what any concerned or reasonable parent would have wanted to do. However, Mr. Hopkins ignored Mr. Picks again and again, even though he insisted on having a civil conversation with him. However, this all changed when Mr. Hopkins began screaming uncontrollably at Mr. Picks. Mr. Picks began fearing for his life when Mr. Hopkins began rummaging through his duffel bag furiously while screaming at him. Mr. Picks tried to calm Mr. Hopkins and pleaded for him to stop. However, Mr. Hopkins did not do so and continued to rummage through his duffel bag. And this is when my client, fearing for his life, threw a kettlebell at Mr. Hopkins' legs in order to defend himself. Your Honor, all my client did was nothing more than what any reasonable or concerned parent would have done. Mr. Picks did not make a terroristic threat, and although we cannot prove that Mr. Picks did not throw the kettlebell, it was only an act of self-defense. And we hope that you review all of the evidence being presented here today and come back with the only possible verdict, the verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Government's first witness? All right, cross-examination.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Please.
Permission to approach the witness?
Yes.
You're on the same football team as Judd Picks, correct?
Yes.
And you attended practice on June 22nd, 2016?
Yes.
And Coach Hopkins was running practice?
Yes.
And Judd Picks and you both play the same position?
Yes.
And you both miss plays, correct?
Yes.
Did Coach Hopkins discipline you both?
Yes.
Did he discipline you roughly? Did he discipline Judd Picks roughly?
Yes.
Was it physical in any way?
Yes.
So your treatment was different from Judd Picks?
Yes.
Does he treat anyone else on the team roughly? Does he treat anyone physically on the team
Yes.
besides Judd Picks?
No.
No further questions.
You may step down. Let's see, what's next? 2 outstanding lawyers for each team. Look, you all did an excellent job, so this is really splitting hairs. As far as I'm concerned, you all did an outstanding job. But for the prosecution, Mr. Abdugaforov, you did an excellent job. And I would say, and everybody everybody I name, it's really for the cross-examinations. You don't control the witness when you cross-examine. It's the hardest thing that a lawyer has to learn to do, and you were all extremely effective at it. Also for the prosecution, for the cross, Mr. Zaid. And then for the defense, Ms. Santana. Tay. That being said, it could have just as easily been the other four of you. I mean, it was really splitting hairs. I think the next thing is MVP awards are to be given out. Do I do that or do you do that?
You do that.
All right, the first MVP, Mr. Zaid. Yeah.
Just so you guys know what these are, they're the mock trial MVPs. So they're not like for the entire summer MVP, but these are 4 MVPs, one from each team, not just the seeded teams, but one from each team over the past 2 days, and really over the past week while participating in the mock trial, one MVP from each team.
All right. Next, Avery Law. Good work. And third, Mr. Tay. Oh, you don't get them. And then finally, last but certainly not least, Madalena Honorable.